Most people saw scrap metal. Denise Carter saw a door, a floor, and one chance to keep her son safe. From 9 nights in a car to a salvaged steel hut behind the pines, this is her story. Like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. $690. Denise Carter counted it twice in the parking lot behind the leasing office. Not because the number was going to change, but because her hands needed something to do. 620s, 80 and 10s, and two $5 bills folded inside the back pocket of her wallet. That was what remained after the final utility payment, the late fee on her phone, a tank of gas, and the small tube of prescription cream Malik needed when the skin behind his knees cracked open in the heat. On an October morning in 2021, the apartment on Red Clay Avenue was already empty, except for dust lines where furniture used to sit. Denise had packed their clothes into 2 black trash bags, Malik's school folder into a grocery sack, and the last clean towels into the trunk of her 2009 Chevy Malibu. The car had 181,000 miles on it, a right mirror held steady with black tape, and an air conditioner that worked only when the engine had been running for 10 minutes. The rent had been $725 when she moved in. The renewal notice raised it to $1,050. The manager called it a necessary adjustment. Denise did the math on the back of an old envelope and understood that necessary for him meant impossible for her. She made $13 an hour on the night shift at Briar Glen Nursing Center, where she changed linens, answered call lights, and learned to walk quietly past rooms where families had stopped visiting. After taxes, groceries, gas, school supplies, uniforms, and Malik's medicine, she did not have the deposit most landlords wanted. She called 11 rentals in 8 days. The cheap ones were gone. The available ones wanted 2 months up front. One asked for a cosigner before asking her name. So Denise handed over the keys, buckled Malik into the back seat, and drove away without telling him they had nowhere permanent to sleep. By early 2023, 16 months later, they would live behind a stand of pine trees in a steel hut with solar lights, a propane stove, a composting toilet, rain barrels, a raised wooden floor, and a lock on the door. The first livable version would cost about $830 in cash. But first, she had to answer the question that decides everything for people with no room left in their budget. Where can you stop long enough to start again? After the 11 calls went nowhere, Denise stopped looking for a lease first. A lease meant application fees, proof of income, a deposit, and credit she no longer had. For those 9 nights, she looked for something smaller. A place where the Malibu could sit until morning without someone tapping on the glass. She found it behind a 24-hour laundromat, outside Pine Bluff Junction, where the parking lot stayed bright under 2 humming security lights, and the dryers gave off a low, steady warmth through the back wall. Denise parked near the green dumpster because it was close enough to the building to feel watched, but not so close that customers would notice them right away. At night, she left each window cracked no more than the width of 2 fingers. Malik slept curled across the back seat under a thin gray blanket that smelled faintly of detergent sheets and hot cotton from the laundromat. Denise slept in the driver's seat, with her shoes on, her purse under her leg, and the keys tucked into the cup holder where she could reach them without looking. At 2 a.m., when the machines were mostly empty, she carried her nursing uniforms inside and washed them with quarters counted from a plastic sandwich bag. Before school, she bought 1 large bottle of water from the gas station next door, poured half into Malik's blue bottle, and saved the rest for brushing teeth, rinsing hands, and wiping dust from his skin before the eczema cream went on. On the 5th night, Rosabelle, the woman who worked the laundromat counter, looked out at the Malibu longer than usual. On the 6th, she wiped the counter, walked to the back door, and pointed toward the corner near the dumpster. She said the camera saw that spot clearly, and the light above it rarely burned out. She did not ask Denise why she was there. She did not ask how long she planned to stay. The next night, Denise parked exactly where Rosa had pointed. It was safer than the side street, quieter than the truck stop, and close enough to a bathroom that Malik did not have to be afraid after dark. But a parking lot can only keep you from being moved for 1 more night. It cannot hold clothes, school papers, or a door that locks. Denise had found a place to stop. Now she needed a place where stopping would be allowed. A woman in room 14 gave Denise the name during a 3:30 a.m. linen change. The way people in small towns pass information they do not want written down. Earl Whitaker, she said, still owned land off Cedar Line Road, 18 acres, that had not been worked properly since his wife died and his back gave out. Denise wrote the name on the cardboard flap of a glove box and drove there the next afternoon after her shift, with Malik asleep in the back seat and her uniform shoes still damp from mopping a hallway spill. The driveway was red clay with two deep tire ruts that held rainwater like shallow pans. The east fence sagged in 3 places. The old equipment shed had a black stain under one corner of the roof, where water had been coming through for a long time. Near the porch, an outdoor spigot dripped steadily into a muddy hollow. Beyond the house, behind a ragged stand of pine trees, the land rose slightly and flattened into a patch nobody seemed to use anymore. Earl came to the porch slowly, one hand on a metal cane, the other resting on the doorframe. Denise did not ask him for charity. She had already learned that charity could come with questions, rules, and the kind of pity that made a person feel smaller than the problem. She offered work. She would clear the brush around the shed, repair the east fence, check the property twice a week, pick up groceries when she drove into town, and take him to the clinic if his son could not make the trip from Birmingham. In exchange, she wanted permission to place a small removable structure behind the pines for 90 days. No deep foundation, no cut trees, no parties, no trouble with neighbors. If the arrangement failed, she would take everything back out. Earl walked the edge of the clearing with her, stopping twice to rest his cane in the mud. The place had no power, no septic, no gravel pad, and no promise beyond a handshake. But it was high enough to stay out of ordinary rainwater, hidden enough not to draw questions from the road, and close enough to Earl's outdoor spigot that water could be carried in jugs. By sundown, Denise had permission to put something on that ground. It was not ownership. It was not security in any legal sense. It was 90 days, earned in labor, on a patch of Alabama dirt where no one had told her to move along. She had found land, but land without walls is only weather waiting to happen. Denise found the Quonset hut at Selma Salvage Yard on a Tuesday afternoon when the sky was low and gray and the yard smelled of wet rust, motor oil, and old lumber. It was stacked behind 2 broken cotton trailers, unadvertised and unprotected from the rain. There were just curved sheets of corrugated steel leaning against a pallet, a few arched ribs tied together with orange twine, and a rusted base rail lying half in the mud. The man at the counter called it a storage shell. Denise walked around it twice before she asked the price. 14 steel panels, 5 arched frames that still held their shape, 3 panels dented along the edges, 1 base rail with rust around the bolt holes. No door, no windows, no floor. Once assembled, it would be roughly 12 feet wide and 20 feet long, about the size of a small 1-car garage. The missing bag of bolts meant she would have to buy fasteners 1 handful at a time. The tag said $500, but the man wanted the space cleared before a shipment of used roofing came in. He said $350 if she could move it within a week. Denise did not answer right away. She went back to the Malibu, sat behind the steering wheel, and opened the purple notebook on her lap. Hut, $350. Gas to move it, at least $40. Self-drilling screws, $22. 6mm plastic sheeting, $24. Damaged plywood, $35. Construction adhesive, $18. A lock for the door, $16. Used lumber, whatever she could buy cheap, trade for, or pull from Earl's shed. The list was already too long, and she had not written down insulation, gutters, buckets, wire, or a stove. Another month in the car would cost more than money. Malik's skin was already rough behind his knees. Her uniform smelled like laundry soap and exhaustion. Every morning began with hiding the truth from a child who was old enough to notice. Denise tore the page from the notebook, folded it once, and put it in her coat pocket. Then she went back inside and paid $350 in cash. The receipt was written in blue ink, the letters slanting hard to the right. The hut did not leave with her that day. It sat in the salvage yard for 6 more days, collecting rainwater in the shallow dents, because Denise owned it now, but still had no way to move it. She had bought the closest thing to a house she could afford, and it was lying in pieces more than 70 miles from the only ground where she was allowed to build. The Malibu could carry clothes, a sleeping child, 2 plastic water jugs, and every document Denise owned in a grocery bag behind the passenger seat. It could not carry a Quonset hut. Renting a flatbed from Montgomery would have cost almost half of what she had paid for the steel, before mileage, straps, and the deposit they would hold on a card she did not have room to use. So Denise started asking. She asked the deacon at New Hope Baptist after Sunday service. She asked a nurse at Briar Glen who had a cousin with a landscaping business. She asked the man who sold used doors behind the feed store. Most said they would check. One gave her a number that no longer worked. The useful answer finally came from Calvin Brooks, a material delivery driver who hauled roofing panels and lumber during the week and parked a low trailer behind his sister's house on weekends. Calvin did not make the offer soft. He said he could go Sunday morning if she covered fuel and helped load. Denise wrote the new numbers in the notebook. Gas and tie-down rope, $48. 2 gas station coffees, $5. Ratchet straps, borrowed. At Selma Salvage Yard, they stacked the curved panels inside one another, turning each sheet so the arcs nested tight and the sharp corners faced inward. The 3 dented pieces went on top where they would not bend the better ones. The ribs were tied in a separate bundle. Every stack got 2 straps, pulled until the steel stopped shifting when Calvin kicked the trailer rail. The drive back was slow. Wind caught the edges of the panels on the open highway, and twice Calvin pulled over to tighten the load. Cedar Line Road was worse. 2 days of rain had turned the last stretch into red clay paste, and near the Pine Line the trailer slid sideways until one tire sank into a soft rut. Earl brought out his old tractor, the kind that coughed blue smoke before it agreed to move. He hooked a chain to the trailer tongue and pulled it the final 40 yards, while Denise walked beside the load with one hand on the top strap. By late afternoon, the steel was stacked in the clearing. It looked smaller there and rougher, no longer a purchase, but a problem with edges. 2 weeks later, Denise left a covered pan of chicken and cornbread on Calvin's porch with a folded note under the foil. It was not enough to call payment. It was enough to say she remembered. The steel had reached the land. But nothing about it could protect a child yet. A pile of curved metal is only a house after someone figures out how to make it stand. Denise built the frame over 3 weekends, because that was the only schedule the rest of her life allowed. Weekdays belonged to Briar Glen, school drop-off, laundry, grocery lines, and sleep taken in pieces. The clearing behind Earl's Pines got whatever was left. Her tools were borrowed and incomplete. Earl's cordless drill with 2 weak batteries, a socket set missing the size she needed most, a bent aluminum ladder, a claw hammer, old rope, 2 straight 2x4s, and garden gloves torn at one finger. Malik's job was bolts. He sat on an upside-down paint bucket and sorted them into 3 plastic containers. Good, rusty but usable, and bad. Denise laid 2 long boards on the ground to mark the temporary line of the base. The first arch took most of a Saturday. It leaned, came loose, and had to be loosened again before it found its shape. She learned not to tighten one side too early. She learned that steel, once bent into a curve, still had its own memory. By the second weekend, she had the first rib standing, tied together with bracing, and enough panels attached to show where the walls would be. Each corrugated sheet had to be lifted, aligned, held with one shoulder, and fastened before the wind noticed it. At the lower seams, she used construction adhesive where the old edges no longer sat flat. The hardest part was not the panels. It was raising the ribs alone. One frame slipped when the rope caught under the base rail, swung down, and struck her forearm hard enough to make her drop the drill. Denise sat in the grass until the white flash in her vision faded. Malik stood silent beside the bucket of bolts. After that, she stopped trying to lift like she had more hands than she did. From 2 2x4s, a crosspiece taken from Earl's shed, a short pulley, and old rope, she built a rough-a-frame lift. It did not make the work easy. It made the work possible. Pull a few inches. Brace with scrap wood. Check the angle. Pull again. Set a bolt. Tighten halfway. Move to the next side. By the end of the 3rd weekend, the hut stood in the clearing with uneven seams, mismatched screws, and one dented panel turned toward the trees, away from the road. Before she could call the shell closed, Denise framed the 2 end walls with used 2x4s and damaged plywood. The door came from a discard pile behind a feed store, warped at one corner but solid enough to hold hinges and a lock. On the opposite end, she cut a small screened vent high into the plywood so damp air had somewhere to leave. When the last hinge held and the door closed for the first time, Denise stepped inside and heard her own breathing come back from the curved walls. The shell was up, but inside, the air was hot, damp, and metallic, and beneath her shoes there was still only Alabama dirt waiting for the next rain. It had shape now, but it could not yet carry a day. Alabama made the hut a different problem than a desert shelter. Heat was only the first part of it. By noon, the curved steel held the sun and pushed it inward until the air felt stale and sharp. After rain, the ground around the base stayed soft for days, and the inside smelled faintly of wet pennies. On cool mornings, Denise found moisture collecting along the lower panels, small beads of water forming where warm indoor air touched cold steel. If she treated the hut like a shed, it would become one. If she treated it like a house without thinking about moisture, it would grow mold before the end of its first summer. So she started at the bottom. Behind Earl's house was a pile of old cinder blocks from a collapsed chicken run. Earl did not charge her for them, but Denise spent 2 evenings pulling blocks from weeds, knocking out the mud, carrying them to the clearing, and stacking what she did not use. She set them in rows under the hut, leveled the worst ones with broken brick and gravel, and laid salvaged 2x6 beams across them to lift the floor off the ground. The plywood was $35 because one corner of every sheet was damaged. Floor screws and nails cost $19. The raised floor left a narrow pocket of air underneath, ugly but necessary in wet Alabama soil. Next came the roof curve. A building supply store had a roll of radiant barrier with a torn edge for $30. Denise cut it with kitchen scissors and fastened it inside the steel, pressing foil tape over every seam she could reach from the ladder. Foam board came later from a school renovation in Hale County, after a site supervisor let her take the cutoffs stacked beside the dumpster, pieces too small for the contractor and too valuable for Denise to leave behind. The larger pieces fit the center of the arch. The smaller pieces filled the sides near the base rail, trimmed and retrimmed until the gaps were narrow enough for construction adhesive. The layer she cared about most cost $24, 6mm plastic sheeting. She stretched it inside the insulation, smoothed it against the curve, and taped every overlap. In the purple notebook, under insulation, she wrote one line, "Keep wet air off the steel." That sentence did not look important on paper, but it was the difference between a dry room and a sick room. By the time the plastic was sealed, the hut no longer rang as loudly when rain hit it, and the afternoon heat did not strike all at once. It was cooler. It was drier. It could hold a floor without smelling like mud, but a dry shell still could not carry a day. Denise still needed water, power, and a bathroom that did not require driving into town after dark. Water came first because everything else could wait only until thirst made it impossible. Denise did not have a well, and a well was far beyond the notebook. For the first month, she filled jugs from Earl's outdoor spigot twice a week and carried them in the Malibu, wedged between laundry bags so they would not tip over on the clay road. Each gallon had a job before it came through the door. Drinking water was boiled or treated. Water used to rinse vegetables went into a bucket for the small bed of collards near the south wall. The last gray water from hand-washing clothes wiped mud from the plywood floor. Malik learned to brush his teeth with half a cup of water and not let the stream run just because a sink in an apartment once made that seem normal. When Denise added rain catchment, it was not pretty, but it worked. 2 old aluminum gutters ran low along the sides of the hut, feeding through leaf screen into PVC pipe and then into 2 used 55-gallon food barrels set on concrete blocks. The barrels cost $30. The gutter pieces cost $18. The screen was $6. The PVC came free from a scrap pile behind Earl's shed. Denise marked the side of one barrel with black tape at 10-gallon intervals, and after every storm, Malik checked it like a weather report. Power came next, but only the kind they actually needed. A small solar installer near Tuscaloosa County let Denise take 2 cracked panels from a discard stack. They were not strong enough for a house with appliances, but Denise was not building that house yet. She bought a $28 charge controller, $17 worth of wire and clamps, 2 12-volt LED bulbs for $9, and a used 12-volt fan for $12. The battery came from a car Earl no longer drove, and Denise knew it would not last forever, but it held enough charge for lights, a fan, and a phone. The system would not run air conditioning, a dryer, a full-size refrigerator, or anything with a heating coil. On good days, it also kept a small radio working when thunderstorms rolled in from the west. Later, when she found a used 12-volt cooler, it became the place where Malik's skin cream stayed out of the Alabama heat. The toilet was the part Denise avoided until avoiding it became its own kind of danger. There was no septic tank behind the pines and no money to install one. Driving into town after dark, every time Malik needed a bathroom, made the hut feel temporary in a way Denise could not accept. So she built a composting toilet from 2 5-gallon buckets, a used seat, pine shavings, tight lids, and a separate covered station behind the hut, on ground that drained away from the door and far from the rain barrels. The buckets cost $8. The seat cost $10. A bag of pine shavings cost $7. She kept gloves, bleach water, and a shovel in a sealed bin, and she treated the whole system like a rule book, not a shortcut. It was not elegant, and it was not something she mentioned at work. But it was clean, cheap, and safe when handled correctly. By the time those 3 systems were in place, the hut could hold a day from beginning to end. Water came from the roof, light came from cracked glass. The bathroom no longer required a drive. Denise could cook, clean, charge a phone, wash Malik's hands, and close the door at night. For the first time, the hut could hold a morning, an afternoon, and a night without sending them back to the car. But Malik still called it the hut, not home, and Denise knew the difference mattered. Inside the hut, no space was wasted. From the door to the back wall, the whole place took 12 careful steps. The front section became the kitchen, because it was closest to the door and the high vent, and Denise never cooked without giving the fumes a way out. Denise set a used 2-burner propane stove on a plywood table built from scrap, with the small propane bottle kept upright beside the shelf, away from the burner and where Malik would not kick it. The stove cost $25. It was for cooking only, never for heat, and Denise checked the knob twice before bed. The first bottle cost $16. A folding table from New Hope Baptist stood against the opposite wall. It was where they ate, where Malik did homework, and where Denise sorted bills into pay, delay, or call. Under the table, a clear plastic bin held rice, beans, cornmeal, oatmeal, tuna, canned peaches, and crackers sealed against ants and damp air. The middle belonged to Denise, though it barely looked like belonging. A narrow bed ran along the curve of the wall. A curtain made from donated fabric hung from a wire to give her a strip of privacy. Beside the bed, a lidded tote held the papers that could not get wet. Birth certificates, school forms, pay stubs, the hut receipt, medical instructions for Malik's skin, and every page of the notebook where the costs were written. Above it, a small pegboard held the drill bits, pliers, tape, gloves, and the hammer Earl had stopped asking back for. The rear section was Malik's. Denise made his bed from pallets, sanding the boards at night, until the rough places stopped catching on her palm. The mattress came from a family support group and spent 2 days in the sun before it crossed the threshold. He had 1 shelf for library books, 1 box for clothes, 1 LED light fastened with zip ties, and a wall that slowly filled with pencil drawings of baseball players, delivery trucks, and a house with a rounded roof. At first, Malik did not invite anyone from school to see it. He kept the word hut in his mouth, like something he was not sure other people would understand. Denise did not push him toward pride. She kept the floor swept, wiped it each night with water saved from rinsing vegetables, checked for damp spots after rain, and made sure the same things happened in the same order every morning: wash, cream, shirt, breakfast, backpack, school. One Friday, Malik brought home an A on a spelling test and taped it to the plywood above his bed. Denise did not say much about it. She just pressed the tape corners flat so the paper would not curl. Earl came by the next afternoon with a carton of eggs, stopped at the door, and knocked on the frame before stepping inside, even though every acre under the hut belonged to him. Malik noticed. A week later, he set a model airplane made from popsicle sticks on the folding table and asked Earl if he wanted to see how the wings worked. He still did not call the hut home, but he had begun showing people where things belonged. By 2025, the hut was still standing behind the pines on Cedar Line Road. It would not have looked like much in a real estate listing. The lower panels carried scratches from branches. The gravel path shifted after hard rain. The shade cloth over the small porch sagged on one side when the wind came from the west. But the doors closed square. The floor stayed dry. The lock worked. Over 3 years, she added to the place only when money and weather allowed it. A cattle panel bent over the entrance became a porch frame. covered with shade cloth to keep the afternoon sun off the steel door. 3 raised beds made from cinder blocks sat along the south side, planted with collards, peppers, basil, and tomatoes that grew unevenly but grew. A third used solar panel went onto the rack. Earl helped brace with scrap angle iron. A 12-volt cooler sat under the folding table, holding Malik's skin cream through the worst heat of July. Denise painted the base of the hut with rust-inhibiting paint after finding 2 cans marked down at the hardware store. She laid a narrow gravel walk from the parking spot to the door because red clay had a way of following shoes inside no matter how carefully a person stepped. Near the entrance, she screwed 3 hooks into a board for raincoats, Malik's backpack, and the work jacket she no longer wore to Briar Glen. In 2024, Denise took a job at a medical supply warehouse for $16 an hour. It did not make the numbers in the notebook easy. It was a schedule that let her sleep at night and sit through parent conferences without fighting to keep her eyes open. She still kept the purple notebook in the sealed tote, still writing down screws, propane, school shoes, oil changes, and every dollar for the concrete pad she wanted under the hut. The first livable version had cost about $830 in cash because so much had been borrowed, salvaged, or traded for raised labor. Earl stopped calling it her steel shed. He called it Denise's place, then later, without making a speech of it, Denise's house. He left eggs on the step in a gray carton when his hens were laying. Denise drove him to the clinic on the first Tuesday of each month and waited in the parking lot with the engine off to save gas. Neither of them named it charity. Malik was 11 by then. He knew the water came from the roof, that the solar panel with the cracked corner still made enough power for light, that wet towels had to dry outside, that the floor had to be checked after storms, and that the propane knob got turned twice before bed. He knew a house could begin as something nobody else wanted. He knew a door did not have to be new to make a room feel safe. Denise never gave the hut a name big enough to make it sound clean or easy. She called it a place built from the hours after work, from bent steel, borrowed tools, rainwater, careful math, and help that did not ask her to trade away her dignity. It did not solve the rent notices still arriving in other people's mailboxes. It did not erase the bills, the repairs, or the careful math at the grocery store. It simply gave one mother and one child enough ground to stop being pushed. On quiet mornings, Malik left for school from the gravel path instead of the back seat of a car. Denise stood in the doorway and listened to the lock click behind him, knowing that for the first time in years, safety was not something she had to ask permission to keep. Which moment stayed with you most? Tell us where you're watching from below. And subscribe for more stories like this.
The lesson in Unite and Malik's story is not just about living at home, it is about seeking human dignity where the world often sees failure. Eunice did not need pity, she needs time, trust, safe ground, and people willing to help research, making her feel small. A loud romance worker points her toward a safer parking spot. A old man led her chase Nabro for length. A driver had more, so still none of them saw her right. But if one gave her enough room to take the next step, this story reminds us that poverty is not laziness, and losing her home does not mean losing the world. Many people are one ranks in grief, one in it, or one is by shift away from starting over. What's matter is how we treat them when they are standing as there is a society becomes stronger when it protects dignity, not just poverty. A community become kinder when help comes is the same, and a home is not only built with wood, steel, water, and light. Sometimes it begins with respect. Sometimes it begins when someone says, with a saying, "E our love, you still belong here."